Thanks for joining me again. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I do appreciate it. Today we're going to do just a few more things to the chassis of this. We're going to build the headache rack for the radiator because it's going to be a rear mount radiator behind the cab. There's just not enough room behind the grill to really make a good functioning radiator, especially since I decided to tilt the cab. So everything that's attached to the cab or close to it's going to have to be articulate or be able to lengthen and shorten, like the steering column, some stuff like that. So behind the headache rack radiators, where that's going to be. We're also going to talk about a couple other minor repairs on this. I'm going to start on the wrecker bed. I actually bought a boom and crane from a salvage company out on the Front Range here in Colorado, and now I have to rebuild it. And what am I doing with this? Nothing on this project. I'm building a set of chromoly axles for another project. But while I'm holding it, don't you just love the sound of chromoly? I started this radiator support, and I'll call it a headache rack just to make it simple because it kind of goes behind you. It's really not a headache rack, but I started with a piece of 6-inch flat 1/8, and I had a local metal shop break it so that it was a curved channel, not just a piece of channel iron. I thought just a piece of channel iron would look kind of tacky. It would look more homemade, and I wanted this to have more of a it came that way look. So spent a little extra money and had the piece of metal broke, cut it sections I needed for the vertical stands. And then on the cross pieces, I used this rectangular tube, which is 1/8 by 3, and it's only 3/4 of an inch tall. And here's how I started the assembly. To start off with, I got some tabs and I bolted those tabs directly to the body mount and to the frame sides, and then I tacked some vertical pieces of that channel in place, and then I tacked the cross bar in place. Once I had them tacked in place, I pull it off, finish welding everything. Now if you notice those welds, they don't look like they're square. The top piece is square, but remember the frame angles. Once you're all together, bolted back in, this is my base. And that base now I can build everything else off of. As I'm putting stuff together on this FC chassis and deciding what I want to do with the bed, because the original bed's just too rotted out to do anything with, I thought about putting a flat bed on it. I did think about building a new bed for it. And there is a company that you can buy bed kits for these FC-170s. I thought about making a dump bed for it. But none of that stuff really got me too excited and too inspired. And then I ran into this. A really cool old wrecker in Sedona, Arizona. After seeing this little wrecker in Sedona, I was pretty inspired to get going on the wrecker bed for this one. So I went and found one, but before I can finish doing the rebuild on the wrecker and install it, there's a lot of preliminary work I got to do on this chassis and get that rolling. Battery tray, fix the gas tank, install it, plumb the fuel system. Gonna have to start a little bit of wiring in there too. I also finished running the hard lines for all the brakes and then plumbed them in with the soft lines to the axles. So I'll show you how I did all that, and then we'll get this crane mounted on this. On the underside of the headache rack, I welded a couple of tabs, and I used those to mount an ammo can. And the reason I needed an ammo can mounted under there is I thought it would be a really good place to mount my ECM. It'll keep it out of the weather. It also keeps it out of the cab, so when I tilt the cab, there's less wires that would be either interfering or possibly breaking. It fit just perfect. Next, I cut the vertical posts for the radiator. I drilled holes in it that matched the radiator and mounted it in, clamped it, and welded it to the base. Once it was welded to the base, I could check clearances front to rear. Once everything was welded, I went ahead and added a couple of gussets to the vertical stands. That way it wouldn't vibrate front to rear and it would stay stable and not break any welds. On the vertical posts, I also welded these tabs in order to have something to mount my smokestacks to for the exhaust. I did just want to point out that I do a lot of this stuff all at once because you have to try to fit and make sure stuff clears. So in this photo, you can see those crossbars in the background and the gas tank. A lot of this stuff you kind of do all at once. I did drill some mirrored holes so I could mount the radiator to the front side or the back side of the headache rack, just in case I needed to move it. Then it was primer, start painting it, and I do like painting things as I go, especially if they're black and frame parts. First of all, you don't miss as much that way, you have better coverage, plus it's easier to touch up later. And then mounted the radiator up, and this is where I happen to mount it at this point, and I may end up moving it later. The battery tray was fairly simple. It's nothing more than some angle welded together to fit my AGM battery, and then I welded it to the inside of the frame and used a couple of tabs and an aluminum crossbar on the top to hold it in. Ran all the brake lines next, plumbed in all the hard lines, ran them through the channel. On the front, I ran them through the inside of the channel, and then they popped out where the soft lines connect, go into the calipers. There's a few places on the frame where I had some existing mounts I used, and there's only a few places on the frame where I had to adjust the line to get over like the fuel pump. In finishing some of this stuff before I set that wrecker bed on, I'm going to drill the tank and put a -6 adapter fitting in. I use a lot of these little aluminum fittings. They really work well, and you can put them with barbs or with compression joints on them. So either way, make your fuel system safe. Something I really recommend, and I definitely need a return line running fuel injection. So anytime you're running a fuel injection, run fuel injection clamps. The other thing, since I do have to do a tank repair on this and weld that seam together, it's a silver solder. It's actually more of soldering than welding, but I use MAP gas on that. And if you're going to do tank repair, please do it safely. I do my tank repairs kind of my own way, but I'm not recommending this to anyone because working on gas tanks is dangerous. If you want to see how I work on gas tanks again, I have a pretty good explanation on my very first video on the Cherokee Chief Part 1 build. That being said, anytime I'm heating a gas tank, I will always displace the oxygen with carbon monoxide off of a running vehicle and an exhaust hose. So this is just how I do it, not how I'm recommending doing it. First, I cleaned the tank out, dried it out real well, and then I fed it with exhaust, and I heated this seam up with MAP gas, and it really worked out well because as I'm heating it, I'm kind of rolling it as a bead, and I'm using the existing silver solder to reseal itself. Once that was done, I went ahead and drilled the hole for the bung for the return line, and then I'm cleaned the tank out, and I'm going to call this finished. Tank's all finished, so I went ahead and repainted it and did an initial install. Once I was happy with how everything was going to fit, I went ahead and installed the channel around the tank straps, then reinstalled the tank, strapped it in, bolted it in, and it's good to go. I used the original fuel lines from the throttle body back down to this point, and then I added some adapters with the rubber lined barb fittings going back to the pump and the tank. No, the zip ties are not permanent. I actually used clamps when I was finished. Once I was finished with the plumbing on the tank, I added some fuel to it, cycled the fuel pump, and made sure I didn't have any leaks, and we're now good to go on fuel. Quick and easy, my drive shafts came in, installed those, now they're done. I found this old ready-built wrecker a couple hours north of Denver at an equipment salvage yard, so I made the 3-hour trek each way to pick it up and haul it back, and once I got it back, I could kind of assemble it on some jack stands and see what I had to work with. Most of it was there, most of it really wasn't in very good shape, but from there I could at least take some measurements and cut it up so I knew what it would fit. That's where those cross pieces that you saw in the earlier photos came in. those are going to go underneath the frame of this wrecker and kind of make it fit the FC. So figuring that out, I cut these all, not the width of the wrecker, but the width of the skirts on the wrecker. Then when I had those all finished, I turned them upside down, primered them and painted them, and when I mounted them to the truck, I left the top surface bare metal so that I could weld to them and change them if I needed to narrow anything. Next, I took some 1.5" square tube and I ran it horizontally, paralleling the frame all the way back to where the rear bumper is going to sit. That way I can tie the rear bumper in with the wrecker mount, and the sling and A-frame will all support itself, secondary to the Jeep frame. As I was doing the rehab on this wrecker assembly, I figured out where a good balance point is and welded a bar in there. That way I can hoist this whole wrecker assembly up with a crane at some point if I need to. The boom was probably the easiest part of this whole rebuild. Take it apart, sand it down, throw a couple coats of paint on it. It's good, ready to remount. This part, not so much. Where the winch mounted was destroyed, so I had to cut it all out and rebuild the entire winch mount assembly and make it so that it would actually work if you were to load a car on it. Nothing quite like something that isn't functional, and this is going to be fully functional. I did have the original winch, which I made it all fit, and then after I got everything fitting correctly and all the mounts rebuilt the way they should be, then I just rebuilt the winch, which included some gears, gaskets, and of course a motor and the controller for the motor. With the wrecker portion of this sanded, clean, winch all rebuilt, I went ahead and hoisted it up and then just clamped it to those crossbars and got everything centered the way it needed to be. And then I started welding in the actual supports, which now bolt to the frame. Here you can see the horizontal bars that I welded not only from the wrecker frame back to where the bumper is, but also from those cross pieces back to where the bumper is. Those are going to add a whole bunch more structure. Once everything was squared up, I welded the entire wrecker to all the pieces on the frame, and now we're ready for the next step. Okay, I think the video is harder to do than the actual build at times. The reason being is there are so many things on the builds that you have to do all at once to make sure things clear right, to make sure something fits before you do something else. And a lot of that's hard to separate in the video, so sorry if some of this gets a little confusing as you're watching, but we're getting there. But that's going to do it for me on this video. I'm finished working this week, so it's time to go four-wheeling. I appreciate you watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on the next video.